All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to our Innovatology podcast, where the latest tech and innovation is translated for you, and especially for you to be more effective in your professional and personal life. Because we find out that actually people are more scared about technology and innovation, and we want to translate it for them, and so that they can leverage it for their daily lives. And this is why we have Innovatology. And today we will have a really interesting topic, which will be more about design thinking, AI, and how design thinking makes you irreplaceable in a world with the artificial intelligence. I am Marie, the founder and CEO of Innovatology, and I am here today with Sabba. So, hello, Sabba.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for
I'm
having me.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation for this podcast. And can you tell, please, our audience more about yourself?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Sava. I'm a former educator. I started in 2006, around seven, as a high school history teacher. And at that time, it was the recession. And so, with my first job, I also got my first layoff notice. And so, had to deal with just like a changing economy and the iPhone was coming out, and there was just so many changes in technology. And I felt like really unprepared. And so, just through a series of different things, I then started to get into education technology and look at how it can be used and just what are the different skills we need to start sort of teaching in our schools and why school needs to change. And so through that, I became a lot more integrated into sort of like the ed tech field. I spent a couple of years at Apple and then really decided to go back to school to do my doctorate and research. What are the next kind of technological advancements we're going to see, and how can we best prepare people? And so this was about 2017. And obviously, everybody knew AI was going to be the next thing that would come. I don't think anybody knew this is what it would look like and this is how big of an impact it would have. But I went back to go research why design thinking is what can really help us be irreplaceable in a world with AI, and why design thinking is really our human advantage. And so we released the research in 2020. And then in 2022, September 2022, the documentary came out. And then November 2020, ChatGPT came out. And so it's just been like this amazing sort of like journey of being a student myself, being a new graduate, kind of really looking at the education system from both lenses, and now kind of being here on the other side.
Nice. Thank you so much. It's also like a really interesting how you said that how can we the best prepare for the AI, because lots of people were speaking about it. We also had some podcast with some people who were, for example, telling about the artificial intelligence for like 30 years, but nobody was to some extent like believing them, or it was like, yeah, sure, some artificial intelligence. But now like these people who were actually like telling about artificial intelligence, they just like went really up. Everybody wants to hear from them what is the next in the AI. But regarding the design thinking, can you tell our audience more what is actually design in thinking for some people that might not really know design thinking as such?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of different methods out there. You'll hear like lots of different frameworks and things. What I think in particular makes design thinking very unique is design thinking is both a method and a mindset, because mindset is really your human advantage. It's one of the most important things when it comes to, taking action, when it comes to being curious, when it comes to being empathetic, when it comes to just believing what you can do. Your mindset plays a significant role, if not like the most important role. So that's number one. Design thinking is a method for how to approach something, but it's also a mindset that allows you to keep going down whatever you're approaching with confidence. The second thing that I think makes design thinking really unique is that method begins with empathy. So, whereas a lot of sort of problem solving solutions and whatnot either start with, okay, what are we going to do about this? Or people usually jump right to the solution. Design thinking says, slow down. Let's go all the way back to the beginning as best we can and really start having conversations and observations for the people we are designing for. And that's really the big shift that that stage helps you make. You go from designing for somebody to designing with somebody. And so there's like different stages of this, but really sort of like IDEO, I think I like their kind of way they explain it. Like that empathy phase is all about inspiration. It helps you see something from a different perspective. Maybe you thought the solution should have been something, but you have a conversation with somebody and you're like, oh my God, like we totally were thinking the wrong thing. Actually, this is where everybody's stuck. This is why it's not working. Or this is what is holding people back. And so that insight and knowledge that you get doesn't even always come just from one conversation, right? It's not like I'm going to go talk to you for 15 minutes and now I know the answers to how to do this. Sometimes it's a series of conversations. Sometimes one person says something and then you observe something else and then you talk to somebody else and then it just clicks. And that to me is really why I believe design thinking makes you irreplaceable, because that kind of information gathering is something an AI tool can't do yet, we always say. And really, and one of the biggest reasons it can't do it is because it's not as simple as 1 plus 1 is 2, right? It can't just go and be like prompt a machine and be like, okay, I need you to do interview this person and da da da. It can help me generate questions. It can help me and analyze the data from the interviews. It can do many, many things. But a lot of times that insight comes from, I just had all these conversations or I was doing this, but now maybe one day I'm walking, I'm traveling somewhere and it just clicks. And that is a very, very, very unique human quality. And if you sort of like nurture that skill set and you nurture your ability to lead with empathy, in the design thinking phase, the rest of the method is sort of, now I have that data. Now let me go and ideate. Let me like look at different ways we might be able to use this information to create a plan. And then last but not least is implementation. But design thinking is not linear. It's not like 1, 2, 3. It's like iterative. So we're always kind of going around and around. And then even when we get that solution, we take it back to the people. Is this working? We test how they're interacting with it. If it's a product, how do they interact with the product? If it's an experience, how successful was the experience and how do people feel in that experience? So it's really just a way of living. And I always say, like, when you go from like not having that mindset to having that mindset is so subconscious. It's just all of a sudden one day you wake up, you're more confident, you're more creative, and you're more willing to just engage with people in what you're designing. And in an AI world where AI can do maybe like 90% of things, that 10% is so uniquely human that I think it's so important to nurture that within not just people, but within our systems and how we work.
Mm. I really align with what you said, that that click, what we are having as a humans, that makes the authenticity on our side in comparison with the AI. And sometimes I'm even like when I have this click, I'm like, how couldn't I think about it before? You know, like I have all of these like technologies. I'm like living in modern society. I'm educated, and how couldn't I like think about this like before? How comes that just right now I reach this point that I really want to change my life, for example, with this kind of exact pattern. So for example, with like a digital nomading, right? Like I was not actually thinking about like being on different places all around the Europe like 3 months ago. And then it just clicked and I was like, why I didn't do it like earlier, you know? Like it just didn't like came into my mind. And right now, like it's just the reality. And it's also interesting that when we have this click, it's I feel that it's like some kind of like evolution or like some spot that we just as a human reach, and then all of the technologies are aligning to us because they see as based on algorithm that we started to be interested in slightly different things than before, because when you are changing a bit like your life, then like the algorithm, for example, like before I would be looking for, I don't know, like Chanel perfume, red bag, right, like a backpack and stuff like this. But right now my preferences are different, and the algorithm and all of the technology is then navigating towards me. It's not that the technology is navigating me as a human. I am navigating the technology with the design thinking. And this is what makes it like super interesting and irreplaceable, because we as a human are giving the trigger to the technology. Right now I want to do this as a human. uh, so my next question would be like, how does it look in practice, like to combine the design thinking with AI, or like when you are, for example, like teaching it to people, or like when you have the clients, or How does it look? What is the first thing that you advise to people when they want to embark on the design thinking?
Yeah, I feel like when people want to do that, one of my favorite quotes is from Don Norman, and he says, "A brilliant solution to the wrong problem is worse than no solution at all. So solve the right problem." So we really do spend a lot of time kind of telling people. And I think, sometimes in the beginning, the natural instinct is to be like, oh, let's talk about AI and let's have a conversation about AI and how are we going to use AI. And one of the first things we do is we really try to get people to not think about AI for a moment, but to really think about the other challenges in the organization or the opportunities. Like, what are things where, like, wow, we really want to be able to do all of this, but this is a barrier for us. And we just started one recently with a high school, and in the beginning, it was all about like, okay, how can we use AI for this? How can we use AI for that? And then as we started going through our conversation, one of the things that really surfaced was that like people don't even want to really engage with technology because cell phones have become such a point of friction between teachers and students. And so what we actually ended up settling on for the design sprint that we were doing was looking at like, okay, how might we use cell phone technology to engage students in building sort of like future ready skills. And through that, now we're having a completely different conversation. Now we're talking about instruction. Now, when they go in, and like right now, they're in the midst of their empathy interviews. But one of the things they're going to be looking for is like, okay, what's happening in the classrooms? When are students picking up their devices? Why are they picking up their devices? When do students not pick up their devices? And what are those moments when they are really engaged and they are really into the experience that, they're a part of? And that's not to say that like every single minute of your day should be something that like you love, like that's just also not the reality of life. But I do think we see a huge correlation between what's happening in your environment and then how you leverage your technology. And so again, instead of trying to look at like how do we use AI in high school for XYZ, we're looking at how do we use technology in a way that meaningfully engages kids in designing whatever pathway it is they want. So they're looking at like portfolios as one option, and like another option they're looking at is like how do we move more towards a project-based environment where they collaborate with the small businesses in their community so that the students can actually showcase projects and things like that in their portfolio. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens along the way. But that's sort of like an education example. Then in the workplace, one of the ones we've done a lot recently is around culture. We see a lot of people, especially after the pandemic, with the friction they had between remote work, hybrid work, coming back into the office and things like that, goes back really to like, okay, what are your workflows like? Like, okay, if you have some people who are wanting to work in this way, but other people who are feeling this way, let's scale back. Let's look at like, what are the goals of your organization? What are some of the things that you are wanting to move forward in? Why do you feel like this isn't working? Is there a way maybe to be able to design workflows that allow for people to have flexibility at work? Because with AI, and this is one of the great things we saw just on that note, was people who really invested in culture building and really looking at like the strengths of people on their team, how to keep people motivated and energized at work so that they weren't experiencing high levels of burnout, really allowed them to be better positioned for artificial intelligence. Because one of the biggest things about design thinking is like that goes back to that empathy piece, right? Building that culture of innovation begins with empathy. Empathy is about like, okay, what motivates you? What drives you? But what do you hate? And what do you not like doing? If I like doing something and you hate doing something, why would we do the opposite? Why wouldn't we each lead with our strengths? And that creates just a really healthy workplace culture. Again, can you do that 100% of the time? Maybe not. But if I could do it 80% of the time, I'm going to be much happier than if I was only doing it 10% of the time.
Wow. And all of this you are doing in your own company, which is designing
Yes.
schools, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So like after we did the research, and the documentary came out and whatnot, like it's yeah, I launched my own company, Designing Schools, and we work with education and enterprise organizations, and we love both because enterprise gets insight into like what's happening in education and the role they can play there to support education, gets really great insight into enterprise and like the skills that workplaces are looking for. So sometimes we can bring these groups together to collaborate, but we also get to learn a lot by playing in these different spaces. And one of the biggest reasons we can do that is because design thinking is a real world skill. So when we teach it to young people in schools, they get to take it into the workplaces too.
Oh, that's so nice. So you are really like collaborating with the schools in California and when like you are teaching people the design thinking in the exact institution, or it's like, for example, that me in Europe can actually connect with you and you can like also give me some coaching in design thinking.
Oh yeah, no, I mean we do this worldwide. We in November actually we're in Dubai, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. So like it's really like a very universal method, and it's a really beautiful way of making people feel energized again. I think burnout, like I don't know what you see or like what it's like where you are. It would be great to hear from you, but I feel like burnout is just such a big theme for so many people not enjoying work. It's like almost everybody's looking for like, what do I really want to be doing? And sometimes the answer to that isn't, I need to leave and go start my own business. Sometimes it's like, I just need a better work environment and I just need a better culture and things like that.
Yeah,
Do you see
exactly.
that where you are?
Yes, it's the same. I think it's the same worldwide that like with COVID, like it opened up a Pandora box, I would say, that a lots of people they started to go on home office. Now a lots of companies they want the employees back, and it causes a lots of like less transparency between the management, etc. So there is a lots of like prone to the burnout that people, for example, like to work for the companies, but the conditions where they are working are not as pleasant as it can be. And the only thing is that the change happened so fast that the leadership and the companies just didn't have time to adapt to it. Which I think is causing why the change is so slow, because we just were able during COVID, we were just able to within 24 hours, like everybody go on a home office. And right now, when there is no longer COVID, and we know that it's possible, it's the change is so slow, and it just because of the control, because the leadership of the different companies just want to control. And I think that this will change with the next generations coming into the leadership positions. However, it's super pity because during COVID, we could see that even in the big cities, there was much less pollution. People were happier, less burnout. People could invest more time, for example, with their kids, with the family time. Because actually, like during COVID-19, I also did research with the European institution on COVID-19 virtual free movement of workers. So it's kind of like correlating with what you are doing as well, where I was actually collaborating with the European trade unions, and we were actually researching how the home office and the virtual work is impacting the workers. And we find out that the people who were living in the countries where governments already applied the digital strategies before COVID, the people were much more happier in those countries because they knew immediately from the day number one of the crisis, which was COVID, what they should do. So they just took the laptop and they went on the home office because they already had, for example, in their contracts written what they should do during home office, how the insurance is, etc. And this like virtual scheme is such a big debate, but it seems to me right now after COVID-19, it's a lot taboo that the a lots of businesses they made like compromise, like we will allow it to you just few days, and it's really not the design thinking. It seems to me rather a rigid mindset than design thinking in this case.
And I think that's such a great point you bring up because it goes back to like the importance of doing this before the thing happens. So when we see that, like I love that you bring that up, that like people who had been thinking about this before, then when you have something like, Chat GPT, or you have something like a pandemic, it's not to say it's not disruptive, and obviously they're very different things, but the point is that like this is just the reality of the world now. Like we never know like what's going to happen tomorrow. Things move quicker than they have ever moved before. So just being reflective and thinking about and noticing like, okay, these are the things that we're seeing. These are like the signals that we see of things coming, of things changing, allows you to just have more time to think about what you want your strategy to be. Otherwise, what happens is when it comes and then you have to respond, it's like you're being forced, and then you just don't have the time to think. There's too much pressure, too much stress, and you don't get to make the kinds of decisions you might make had you not been in such a pressured situation. So I love hearing that reinforcement that like if you engage in this ahead of time, which is still not too late, right? Like that's the point of like, I think having these conversations right now is to really encourage people. Like we need to rethink like the 40-hour work week and people coming into an office is gone, right? That's not even a next generation thing. That's like our generation thing, right? And if you want to keep and retain the best people, like look at like I'm in California, you're in the Canary Islands, like the world is just such an incredible place with who we can connect with and how, that being able to like see that as an opportunity and embrace that and reimagine how we work and also how we learn in our schools, I think is just like it's such an exciting time to like be part of this work.
Yeah, it's a really amazing. And as you said, like everything is happening so fast. I just cannot right now, like it just like popped into my mind because everybody is right now speaking about AI agents that they are coming like pretty soon.
Yeah.
Not that like they are already like to some extent like out there. Like we can say that ChatGPT is our assistant right now, but there will be like a much more AI assistants in the future. And when this will happen, and there will be big boom about it, around it, I just like the board will just be so fast because you just like right now you have one position at work and you are just there yourself physically or like virtually or whatever. But then like when there will be like AI assistants, for example, 10, 20 per one person, we will be able to do work much faster. And so you can imagine like how fast we will go with the evolution, and you will no longer need, for example, like 8,000 of employees. You will need just, for example, like half of it, but it doesn't mean that like the layoffs from the companies will be, of course, like it will be big shock, for example, for the people, but then it might also be that like these people can open like their AI agencies, they can like start on new opportunities because again like this new phenomenon which is coming will open totally a new door to a new opportunities. Like for example, what was it during COVID-19? It happened from one day to another. The restaurants closed, a hotel closed, corporation closed. Of course, it had like negative impacts on the people, on the businesses, as the next phenomenon will have. But then it opened another door because we are leading to something new, and this new is like super exciting. And we need to, what you should do if you are now listening to us, I think, is that like you should be going with this change like step by step, because right now if you already are mastering ChatGPT, you will not be impacted that much by the AI agents that are coming. And I'm still like a bit really like sometimes when I see people that they are like avoiding the AI, like no, I'm not using ChatGPT, no, I'm not using Copilot and other AI, I don't believe in this. It's like the boom when it will come, it will be such a big shock that yeah, this might be really, really groundbreaking.
I think you're so right. And, like we always like to say, like, it's also, I think sometimes because of how we grow up in school and how we're used to work being, I see a lot of people who are like waiting for somebody else to tell them what to do. And one of the things that we say a lot to people, just to like preserve your own, just to have agency over what comes next, is it's not somebody else's job to redefine your role, because I think many people's roles are going to change. I think people try to like be overly like sensitive and comforting, like, oh no, like you're human, like no one will ever replace you. But I don't think that's going to be the reality. I think we're going to see AI advance rapidly. I think we already are, like you shared. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to face a lot of disruption in their roles. And I always say it like, it's never going to replace you maybe 100%, right? But if it replaces you even like, so like I really love the research that Eric Brynjolfsson does. And one of the things that he says is like AI isn't good at jobs, AI is good at tasks. But if AI can do, let's say, even 40% of your tasks, does that mean then tomorrow that like you're not going to get 40% of your salary? Or that now you're a half-time worker instead of a full-time person? Like these are the kinds of like societal like cultural norms like we have to really start discussing, because we could not figure out remote work, right? Like I can't see you, so I don't believe you're working. Now you have AI tools that are going to do 40% of your task and we think we're going to be okay. Like this is going to be a really 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 hard disruption. But I think if you're the kind of person who's like, oh my God, with AI, yes, it can do 40%, but now I'm able to do this extra 20% that I wasn't able to do before, doesn't always mean more hours. It means impact. And that's the shift I think we're going to have to start to make. Like, it'll be really interesting. It's like, back in the last industrial revolution, how they went from like a gazillion hours to 8 hours, and like that was their big achievement that we've had for like the last 100 years. I think this next 100 years is going to be moving away from the number of hours you work to how much impact you make, because I can make an impact in 1 hour, right? Like we can, there's things that I can do in 1 hour. I don't need to be sitting here for 8 hours to do the same thing, so I shouldn't be judged in the same way. And I think that's a really, really, really hard mindset shift from education all the way to workplaces. But I'm really curious because I've been wanting to ask somebody this and I just haven't. This is perfect. Do you feel like, because okay, in America, everything's way more like capitalistic, corporate. Like we don't get like those healthcare benefits and like all these other things you see sometimes in places like, I was born in London. Like it's like night and day here to there. Do you feel like people there are less worried about this, and like you feel like those societies might be able to adapt better than like here? Like I'm curious to hear from you, like what you hear from people in the trade-off.
This is a really good question. I was actually thinking about it recently because I was in Mexico and I met lots of US people there, and I really feel that the mindset in US is different than in Europe, in the sense that it's in Europe sometimes even like from the business, because I'm also a business owner, and here in Europe when you say that you are a business owner, that you are working on your little thing, people are like, yeah, sure, like like you will bankrupt sooner or later, and people are not that much enthusiastic as they are in the US. When I'm coming to US, for example, I was in January in Las Vegas for the conference, tech conference, and I was just in the elevator, and there were some Americans just asking me like, yeah, what do you do? And I was like, yeah, I have Innovatology, and we do like podcasts and stuff. And he was like, oh my God, it's so cool. I really love it. Yeah, send me the link. Here is my Instagram. I really support you. And it was just in the elevator, and I was like, wow, this is the mindset, this is what I love. But then it's also that I feel that here in Europe, it's that we have this like a safety net, that we have this like a health insurance, we have the societal like safety net, that we cannot go really like a low, because it's like we are supported by the system, by the government. If for example you don't have work, you get paid for your children, for your sickness, for everything. So people feel so much comfortable, and this is why they are not going that much into the risks, like for example a business. When you get your business, you are losing a bit of safety net at some point, and this is what I feel that the system in Europe is not is it's advantage and disadvantage. It's a disadvantage for the business owners, because you need to be really brave to find your community who can support you, whereas in US you feel really supported by our other business owners, because it's risk or nothing. It's like I feel that in US it's also like different mentality around this. But on the other hand, it's advantage, because when there are changes like this, we have this safety net that is supporting us. I mean, it depends also on the different member states. So for example, when I was doing the research on the virtual free movement of workers, it was only on the European Union. And we find out that, for example, the best performing countries in the digital skills and digital strategies was Netherlands, Estonia, Ireland, whereas I'm originally from the Czech Republic, and Czech Republic is below average. And it's really bad even now. It's right now it's like 4 years after COVID. And when I am speaking with people from Czech Republic, they think right now that the biggest innovation is Slack. And I'm like, oh my God, but Slack for me was like maybe 5, 10 years even like ago, when it was like super like boom. And it's like really big like differences in the different countries, because each of the member states in the EU is governed differently in the digital. So I also believe that when it comes to the new evolving technologies, like in this case we are speaking about the AI agents, that the different member states will be like approaching it slightly differently. But on the other hand, the legislation, it's done on the European level. So the EU is always making sure that they are protecting the consumers inside the EU. So, like for example, the AI Act that was published quite recently, there are like advantages and disadvantages. I feel that like US has more like, yes, let's do it. I love it. Like, it's new. I'm not, I'm fearless and stuff like this. Whereas we are more like, I'm not sure. Like, is it like safe? I like my comfortable safety net. internet, and so it depends.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such a good point because I think that's the thing right now. Like, there's no like right or wrong, but it's like really thinking about like what do we need to create to help people like all benefit from sort of like what's happening instead of like just this like small group over here.
Yeah. I also have a question because, like, where did you start it with the design thinking? Like, for how long are you actually applying this methodology? Where did you learn from who or where?
Yeah. Oh my God. So, like, it was really interesting. There were like three things that happened sort of like all at the same time, very much like serendipity. So, the first one was I had shared, right? Like, I was a high school history teacher, and my sister was in a graduate school program, a medical school program at USC. And her school was using iPads, but like they weren't really like doing a lot with them. And so, by working with her, basically, long story short, I ended up getting hired and I became their director of innovative learning. But I was a history teacher and it was like a med school program and I was like so out of place. And so I was just like reading, observing, like things like that. And then at the same time, I read this book called The Second Machine Age. And the last line of the book is technology is not destiny. We shape our destiny. And I was like, okay, well, how do we shape our destiny? Like, okay, I want to do that. And then maybe 2, 3 weeks later, I went to a conference, an education conference, and there were two first grade teachers. And these two first grade teachers were talking about how they were using this design thinking method to teach literacy, engineering, and technology. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went there. And it was so fascinating to me because whereas with most things, we feel like we have to throw out everything we were doing and just start from scratch, they had just slightly tweaked the assignment. And so instead of just having kids read the story, answer some questions and things like that, they had the students read the story, and then each student got to choose to be a character in that story. So the story was called Catch That Rat. It's like, the typical like grandma's catching the rat, the kids catching the rat, like everyone's trying to catch the rat. And so the kids got to choose one of those characters and then look at like, okay, what problem do you think the character has in the story? So, for example, one of the students chooses the rat, and they're like, well, everyone's scared of the rat, but the rat's just hungry and just cold and just wants a place to go and like be warm. And so then they have to like make a solution. Like, okay, well, how are you going to solve for that? Like, everyone's scared of the rat. What are you going to do? And so not only are they reading the story, they're also creating a story. They're problem solving. They're doing all these other little things along the way. So one of the students ends up taking like a paper towel roll, covering in some foil, and like making like a little machine where like you go in as a rat, you come out as a human, you go in as a human, you come out as a rat, as a way of being able to like experience what it's like for the other person. And so I was just like, oh my God, this was such a mind-blowing concept. You just made a small little change that had such a huge impact, that was covering all these skills and all these things that we hear other people talking about. So then when I went back to USC, that was the method I kind of used. I was like, oh my God, because prior to that, the way we introduced technology was like, here's this application, here's the amazing things you can do. Here's another application the next week and the amazing things you can do. Whereas with design thinking, it was like, okay, no, like we're not going to tell you about these apps. We're first going to ask you what's working well for you right now, what's not working well, and then can technology even be a solution? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But one of my favorite projects that we ended up doing, and this was 2014, by the way, this was like 10 years ago. So one of my favorite projects we did, the students in their first year had to do a 40-page research paper. And the goal of the research paper was to build empathy with the communities because they were going to go doing rotations in those communities down the line. And what we ended up learning was the students were just Googling the information and writing the paper. And so again, we took that method from design thinking, from what we saw the first grade teachers do. We didn't change the whole assignment. We didn't get rid of writing. We didn't do any of that. We just changed the prompt. Instead of write a 40-page paper on XYZ, it was if this community had a story for healthcare providers, what would that story be? And instead of just writing a paper, they had to do the research and the writing, but that was just one part. They also had to make a documentary, like a very short film, like a 2 to 3 minute. They had to interview people and they had to like, okay, what's the story this community wants to tell them? And how are you going to tell that story? So again, didn't change and throw out everything, but a small tweak, leveraging the tools and technology we had, allowed it to be a completely different experience. And they do that assignment till this day. So like I always love going on the YouTube channel and seeing each year the different videos and the different communities that they go to. But that was sort of my first entry point in 2014. And like I said, it just changed my life, not just professionally and work, but also personally. My own mindset became so much more open minded. I felt so much more confident when I was put in a new situation because I always knew I could rely on this method to be able to figure things out. And that's the beauty of design thinking. Like you might not know what the answer is, but you have the confidence that you'll figure it out.
Mm. Yeah, this is really important, and I'm always telling. I don't know if you also have this, but when there is like some big task in front of you, there is like deadline approaching, and then you are just having this kind of feeling like, oh my God, this I cannot make this. Oh my God, like stress, nervousness, and stuff, and then just the acknowledgement, like you figured out in the past already, like worse things. You can figure out also this, just to like calm down first, that like
Oh,
actually like you will figure it out sooner or later. This is just like you have been in worse situations. This will just not disrupt who you are, what you are doing. It will just set down. It's really important, like a realization that like how you should approach the issues and how you should deal with them, and that design thinking is actually giving you the methodology to then find a solution to your issues that you are having. And I also like what you said, that you said a question like, is the technology actually a solution? Because sometimes I see even with my clients that they are really like hardly trying to figuring out like, oh my God, what software I need, or like something. And then I'm like, you can also do it still like as a human, manually. Like sometimes you don't need like technology for everything. For example, one of the stories like in Mexico, it was with really simple stuff like as WhatsApp. And my friend just wanted to like send me some telephone number on WhatsApp, that I will like write to that number something. And she was just like next to me with her WhatsApp, and she was like, yeah, this is the WhatsApp number that you should text. Let me send it to you. And then she was like, oh my God, but I need to like copy that number, I need to like create a new contact, I need to like send it to. And I was like, but I can also just look at your phone and just like write down the number that you have like in front of me. Like we don't need to do this whole like process. And like this is, I realized that this is like happening a lot in the digital sphere currently, because there every day there is new software release. There are like project management tools, like so many of them, and it's like some of them are less expensive, some of them are more expensive. Then you choose the one that you actually don't want to invest in, and then you are just stuck with it. You pay big bills, even though that one that was cheaper was actually a much smarter solution. But you didn't go with the design thinking to actually define what you exactly need to then like match it with the software. You just went for the software which was having probably the best marketing options, who just catched you with like the best offer, sales, and whatever. And then you ended up just to have more bills of the softwares. And I think that I'm not the only one, but the softwares can really add up, especially when you are having your business. It's like a never ending story with the bills.
absolutely. Oh my God, there's like always something new, always something different all the time. You're so right.
So yeah, so how do you actually approach this like new technology spheres? Because I also saw that you actually worked for Apple for some
Mhm.
time. So is Apple also using the design thinking, or what are the other methodologies that they are using, and what actually you learn the most from that career? Because after the Apple, you actually launched your own company. So like, what was the step, like, yeah, all right, like now I have enough and I'm going for my own business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I forget what the story is and which one it is, but there's a story, I think it's the mouse. IDEO partnered with Apple, I believe, when they were making some of those like early things. But yeah, I would absolutely say design thinking is very much a part of the culture at Apple. One of the biggest things that I would say is a bigger part of the culture is collaboration. And that's why design thinking by default kind of becomes what it is. Like, even if you think about like the Apple Watch and like how they're always listening to their users, always listening to their customers, always, engaging with people in the field. Even when in my role, I was working with schools, always talking with schools, always being connected. How can we support you? Like, what's what's going on, just really being that observer and that partner. But I feel like one of the biggest, there's two really big things I learned from Apple that I feel like once I left, I realized like, okay, wow, like this isn't everywhere. And number one is the ability to have hard conversations. I feel like a lot of people are very afraid to, and I think that's just part of the overall culture today where like you express an idea that's different or you say something that you don't agree with, and all of a sudden it's like, you must hate me, or this is like awful, or that person's mean to me. And so this culture where we can't like really interrogate ideas is very dangerous for the future, because it means that now I'm afraid to tell you about a challenge I see, a flaw I see. So being able to just be comfortable being like, okay, like, no, that's not good enough. Like, we need to do better. Or like, that's a great first draft, but like, let's think about this. Let's think about this. Let's think about this. Like, really interrogating your idea, like, as much as you can, with as many different perspectives as you can, allows everyone to be more successful. And one of my favorite quotes on this came from, so when I went to do my research, I did it with the teachers, those two first grade teachers that I learned from. I went back to their school to go learn from them. How did you do this? Because no one else seems to be able to. Like, how did you do this? And they had some really, really, really good lines. I always say it's like the iceberg. You know, you just see this on the top, you see all the innovation, but there's all these things underneath you don't see. And one of the things they said is, when we start with an idea, or you put an idea on the table, it's no longer my idea or your idea, it's our idea. So now we own this idea, right? Like, collectively. So now when we say something, it's not like I'm attacking you and your idea. It's our idea. And so we're all putting in our diverse perspectives, thoughts. We don't have to agree, but we do have to get comfortable wrestling back and forth with that interrogation of that idea. That's one thing that I feel like really allowed me to do things, really pushed me in my thinking, that put me where I am today. And then the second big thing, like, goes hand in hand with that, is the culture of collaboration. It's always like not just collaboration with people on your team, but collaboration with people across other teams as well. So knowing how to initiate that conversation, knowing how to say like, okay, hey, I have this idea, but I need to involve this person, this person, this person. How do I get that ball rolling so that I'm not like, well, I had an amazing idea and nobody wanted to do it? You know, like, that's just like, again, another thing we hear a lot. Like, when I left Apple, I'm just like, oh my God, like, this is not how it works. Like, even right now, when people see policies that come down or people see things, that inability to take initiative, no, I'm going to wait for somebody else to do it, that's not my job to do it. Good for you if you want to have that mindset. It's a losing mindset in this world. And so the more you are that person that takes initiative, that brings people together, that is like, builds the trust. And this is why, like, I talk a lot about Amy Edmondson's research, because if people don't feel safe, you'll never get that culture. And that's why we say like cultures of innovation begin with the culture of empathy, because if you don't have that culture of trust and safety and empathy amongst your people, they'll never get to a place where they're around a table interrogating each other's ideas. So I would say those like very nuanced cultural elements, were just great to be a part of.
Wow, I really love it, especially the one like ability to have hard conversations. And I would like to ask, like, how do you think that is so in Apple? I know that it's probably like cultural, but for example, in the companies that I ever worked in, it was either like really hierarchical, so like you should be like really afraid of your hierarchy, or there was, for example, like the conversation like it's not hard, it's just like how you are saying it, which I also was like always like, yeah, but it's, I mean, it's like, it's really crucial, it's like alarming, like we should start to do something, and they're always like, it's not alarming, it's how you are telling it to other people. And I'm like, yeah, but how you want to like it's just like, if like my team is burning out with something, I'm just telling you we are burning out and you should like help me to get things done together. Like, for example, if you have like two different teams and like you exactly should have the initiative together to solve the issue because you are working for the same vision. So why do you think that Apple is such a good company for like having a hard conversations, or how did it actually look in your meetings that like people were like open to this?
I mean, obviously I wasn't there from the beginning, so like it's hard to say. I mean, I do think that like culture of excellence is really just a value that like they have. Like, um, I imagine it probably came from the Steve Jobs days. I mean, like, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it came to be in that way, but I do think it's a place where people really care about the work they do
Mm.
and the impact they have. I think every single person there really, really genuinely cares. Like, this is really important work. Like, we really believe like it's really important work, and our work really makes a difference. Like that's, and I think those two beliefs really, they put you in a completely different mindset for how you approach things. And because everybody believes that, like, yeah, like, I think there's also a lot of humility. There's a lot of humility there. It's really rare you see somebody, like, I remember I never really encountered somebody who was like, I'm just better than everybody, type thing. Like, it's, everybody has a bit of imposter syndrome, if you will. Like, like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm a part of this. Like, every time you walk into Apple Park, like, it never gets old. Like, I used to do a lot of what we call executive briefings, which are where like companies or education leadership teams will come to spend a day to learn about the technology, to learn about the future, learn about like, different like possibilities for like where the future is going and what we should be thinking about. And I used to facilitate those. And I remember every single morning when I used to like walk onto, like, first it was Infinite Loop and then Apple Park campus, that feeling never gets old. It's just like, wow, like, this is not just such an amazing place to be, but it's such important work we're doing. And now when I think about a lot of the things that we're seeing now, Apple has one a report I used to share a lot called Creativity in Education. And it was done in maybe 2000, no, like 20, I can't remember when, but it was done like, let's see, when I think that was 2021, maybe 2019 or something. It was done. Basically, it was done before the pandemic. And one of the biggest things it talked about was like just the importance of like all these skills that now are essential. Back then we were talking about like, hey, automation is going to happen. Like, this is why it's so important to redesign the way you work, like thinking about mobile technology, thinking about all these other things that now everyone's like, oh my God, I need this now. Whereas, just thinking about things before. And I think just having been a part of a culture and a community and a workplace where people were thinking about those things before allowed me to think about things in a different way as well, because it wasn't something hypothetical or something that like wasn't there. It was something we were experiencing every day. And so I think that sort of like that gratitude maybe for what you do, and knowing that you make a difference, and everybody makes a difference in some way. I just don't think that's such an embedded part of everybody's culture. And so I think when we do create spaces where we remind people like, hey, the work we do really matters, and like, you really make a difference, you show up differently to what you do, and you're more willing, you realize the stakes are much higher. Like, this isn't just about putting something out or just doing another presentation. No, this is going to impact the decisions people make. Like, what you choose impacts the future of these kids in these schools and what they're going to have access to. So like, I need to do the best possible job I ever can to help you see and understand that future and where we're going, because it's not really in front of you right now, but it will be. And here we are today.
Mm. Yeah, the vision, the mission of
Yes.
being part something bigger and like changing the society, having impact on the people. I really love it. And so, like, now back to you. Like, how did you then like decided? Okay, like I'm going for my own company.
Yeah. So, as amazing as it is, and amazing as everything is, there are definitely limitations. And one of the limitations is not being able to do like all these kinds of other things, right? The side projects of this and that. And so it got to a point where I think it was, honestly, it was the pandemic. And my sister was in London with her family. And so I went to go spend some time there with her, and just being able to experience like remote work, and just having done all this research, and having like, I was at that time, the documentary hadn't come out. So I was sitting on all this footage and all this, like, I had this amazing story. And it was almost like, okay, you could stay where you are and be comfortable, because I was very comfortable, or you can make a decision or place a bet that this research you have is the future. And I thank God every single day that I did that, because the one thing it allowed me to do, because I left in 2021. And so by leaving early, I was talking about this sort of before a lot of other people were with ChatGPT. And so it really allowed me to build a strong brand foundation. I mean, people had heard it from me even prior to that, because they had seen the research, design thinking, like it's a very natural evolution. But I always, it was honestly just like this moment where it was like, okay, you're going to have to choose one path or the other. Either you stay here and you just keep doing this, or you go and you like pursue this like new like technology and like all these other things that are going to come. And there was one resource in particular that really helped me make that decision. And it was the Spark Type by Jonathan Fields. It's a free assessment online. But what I love about the Spark Type is it talks about what energizes you. And so I was like, very much like, because, okay, a lot of people would always tell me things like, wow, you can just never stay in one place for a long time. You're never committed. You're always like jumping from one thing to the next. And so when I was leaving Apple, I was like, oh my God, am I going to regret this? Like, am I being ungrateful? Am I just jumping from one thing to the next? And when I got the spark type, what it told me was that I was like a scientist, and it's like you enjoy the problem space. Once the problem is solved, you want a new problem to solve. And I think that's very different than telling somebody you're not committed. And so I think sometimes, like growing up, we do hear language about ourselves that informs how we think about ourselves and the choices we make. And that's why I think it's so, so, so important to get clarity on your skills, your strengths, your motivations, and what drives you. Because what that looks like to other people might be very different than what it actually is internally that energizes you at work. So I always say, like, this is the most instability, the most like stressful, like everything, but it's honestly the most at peace I've ever been in anything I've ever done. So I think there are like just different things that can help you along the way in making those decisions. But I think a big part of it is having confidence, but also having experience. Like I had a lot of experience leading into this that I was like, okay, like there was enough data points to show me this was a decision that was viable.
That's such a beautiful story, and also in a lots of stories that you told us, there is your sister. So I guess that she was part of of your success and what you are building. That it's such a beautiful to see that you have a really nice relation. And after our conversation, so I will be doing Spark Type.
Yeah.
If you can also then send me in the chat here like the link to the spark type, so I can also link it to this episode so that people can try to do it. And also we would like to read definitely your research. Is it somewhere available online?
Yeah, so like, okay, more than the research, because the research is like written in a very specific way. I have a book coming out on November 7th, which is the research, but it's written in a more human way. So you'll enjoy reading the book more than the research. But the book is called Designing Schools, Why Design Thinking Makes You Irreplaceable in the Age of AI, and it's coming out on November 7th. But there is a
Yeah.
free documentary online. It was funny, I thought like, oh, we'll do a documentary who like everyone's gonna watch the 1 hour movie and not the book. And everybody was like, no, you need a book, you need a book. So I was like, okay.
And is there somewhere like for example waiting list, or how can we know that I know that it's like November 7th, but in digital age everybody wants to just get a reminder and like get it into our mailbox, or like do you have your own website or where we can check that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just designingschools.org/book. So if you go there, yeah, you'll be able to get it. And then I'll link this for you all here. So then you can have the spark type. And then can you also link your research? I don't know if that's available with that study you were talking about where you looked at like the impact of digital strategies.
Yes, I will also put the link in the chat. So first I will pin for our audience the spark type. And yes, perfect. So yes, I have a last question from my side, and it's about what advice would you give to people who are starting with their own business after their career? And so you had a really successful career, and I think that also the switch between the career comfortable path to actually go more into the unknown of the business owner and your own enterprise, it's always like a really hard decision. So, what would be one thing that you would advise to the people to actually embark on the journey of business, and how they should proceed with that?
Wow, that is such a good question. I always think so. Number one, spark type. I think having an understanding about why you feel and think a certain way is so important because otherwise, other people's thoughts and opinions will overshadow sometimes your insights and your intuition. So, this is the number one, is getting really clear. Like, this is just who I am. This is what drives me. This is what motivates me. And also knowing the opposite is true. That's also what I love about the spark type. It doesn't just tell you what energizes you, it also tells you what doesn't energize you, which also gives you insight. And so that's number one. Number two, I think you have to find spaces to experiment and explore. I think, so throughout my entire, what was it, like 2014 to like all the way up until 2010 is when I started my blog. I think writing brings so much clarity to any idea. And I know like people think like, oh, ChatGPT writing is so under threat, but I think there's a really big difference between writing you do in school and writing you do to think and learn, right? Like why we read books, why we do all these things. Like that's not what writing in school usually looks like. And so I think writing just helps you unpack ideas, whether it's journaling, whether it's whatever you want to do. I think it helps you unpack ideas and find connections and insights. For some people, it might be video, it could be anything for you, but finding a method where you are constantly just journaling and reflecting is really important. Then I think that helps give you the data you need to look at like where your direction and focus should be placed. And the biggest benefit everybody has today that didn't exist before is ChatGPT. The fact that you can like now go in and be like, hey, these are all my journals, or like journal with ChatGPT. We have a course called the AI Bootcamp. And in our course, one of the first exercises people do is like we take the Atomic Habits framework and we have you do these certain journal activities for a week with ChatGPT. And it's by far people's favorite activity. So just seeing, okay, so what I'm thinking, what could my first step be in creating a business or creating a product that's actually going to like be financially sustainable as well. So I think like that process helps you kind of determine what it is you want to do in a way that is going to like, help generate some income, because you want to be able to test something to see what your audience wants, what people want, where you feel your strengths are, and what you even enjoy doing. And then from there, when you get that data from people, like maybe I'm starting with a workshop, maybe I'm starting with a consulting service, maybe I'm starting with a free PDF guide, like it just gives you the insight you need to figure out like, okay, where to kind of place your focus. I think through that process, when you're also talking to people, what are their challenges, right? Just using design thinking, even going into ChatGPT and being like, hey, like I want to use the design thinking method to do, just think about how I could start this new business, like to do XYZ, right? I mean, today, like websites can be generated like so quickly, like you can get anything up and going at such low cost that it's truly remarkable. So the most important thing is to really zone in on what problem are you solving and what energizes you in that part of that problem that you are looking to solve, because you want to be able to wake up every single day super energized doing what you're doing. And then I really think balance it out. Like I think, doing that while you're still somewhere sometimes can be harder, but that's also why you have the luxury of like the stability from whatever you're doing, that you can take those small steps and you don't have the pressure of like, oh my God, I need to be bringing in this much right now and like this and that. So find those spaces where you can balance like that stability while you figure out what those other pieces might be, because sometimes you can let this passively run here and you might be very happy here. And I actually think the more workplaces embrace the idea that not everybody just wants to do one thing, the more successful everybody's going to be. Individuals will be happier because they'll have their different outlets. Companies will be happier because you won't constantly be losing people or having to retain people and control them. It just is not the future of what work will look like. And so giving people those opportunities for those different income streams, I think becomes really important as well. So that would be kind of the first place to start, I guess. Like,
That's so
what
beautiful.
would you say?
And just last tip, because you said that you are journaling with ChatGPT, but I just
Yeah.
cannot like imagine how do you do so? Because so like, can you just give us a quick tip
Yeah.
on how to journal with
Yeah,
ChatGPT? Because I'm doing
absolutely.
journaling myself, and I think that this is adding the authenticity to yourself. And then it's like, step by step, you are like journaling, you do the content, you feel overwhelmed all the time, but like pushing the boundaries just adds up. And like with journaling, you are just keeping the authenticity, and it can even turn the ChatGPT can then like
Yes.
give you the content based on your journaling. But
Yeah.
how do you journal with ChatGPT actually?
Yeah. So you definitely want to start with some kind of framework. So like whether it's like, full focus, Michael Fullan, or we really like atomic habits, because the whole point of journaling, right, is to impact your daily habits, like small steps, whatever. So we basically say like, I don't have the exact prompt on me, but it's something along the lines of like, okay, for the next 5 days, I'm going to, do a journal activity with you, and I want you to kind of integrate the ideas from atomic habits to help me reflect on my goals, my reflections, and like we have a couple other areas we say. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can write in your journal, take a photo and upload it in each day, or you can just sit there and type with ChatGPT. You might type somewhere else, copy and paste it in. It's up to you how you want to do it. But by going in, and we have a prompt every day, but by going in every day and kind of doing this journal reflection, ChatGPT can do the one thing that is very hard for us to do, and that's analyze your reflections.
Mm.
So at the end of the week, it can tell you, wow, these are the top three things you really talked about. You can ask it, like, what are things that I should be thinking about that, maybe I'm not, based on what I've been journaling about. So it's really hard to go back and do a data analysis on your journal entries. What words have you used the most? What is my tone being like the most? Am I happy? Am I nervous? Like, what kinds of sentiments are you picking up from my journaling and my reflections? What are things that maybe I'm overthinking that I shouldn't be? So like you can like basically talk to your journal in a way that you just is hard to do unless you're going to go back and read and count every word, letter, type of thing and do the analysis. Most people barely have time to journal, let alone analyze their thoughts. So the fact that you can take this information that we have in this way that we're collecting and gathering, being able to go and put it in, and you can even do audio now as well, right? We can now even upload audio files. Like there's so many different mediums through which you can document your thoughts, but going into that and telling it, hey, at the end of this week, what's one thing I should be thinking about? What's one goal or small habit I should integrate for next week? It just becomes like a way of like this self-reflection, self-awareness, and things like that.
Wonderful. I really love it as a closure of our podcast. So thank you so much, Sabba. And this was the last tip of the today's podcast about how design thinking can make you irreplaceable with from the AI. So I really learned a lot actually, and you have a really impressive story. We took it from like the business through your career. Also, like I think that there was a lot of added value about how to use the chat gpt, or even like what are the main takeaways from working with Apple, and also about your business, the designing schools, and that your book is coming really soon. So I think that like not only me but also other of our audience is really excited to tune in for this book, because as you said, like this was the turning point in your career, in like going more into the business and like turning it into something a bit different. So thank you so much for this podcast, and our audience, you can also get excited for our next guest, which will be actually on Wednesday. We are now doing like two podcasts per week about the latest innovation and tech. So we have even upgraded now with our guests because you were asking about it a lot. So tune in on Wednesday for the next podcast. You can find it on LinkedIn, on Meetup, or on Eventbrite, and you can register there for the next episode. So thank you so much, and see you on Wednesday.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.